Hello and good evening again, folks. And it is the final part of Tank Week. It seems to have flown past in the end, and we are off to the Netherlands and the Scheldt Estuary. And I hope you have enjoyed the previous 4 shows and you've learned something about armoured warfare and looked at things from a different point of view. But I've been looking forward to this show. We ran through it this afternoon. Joining me tonight, serving warrant officer in the British Army, part of the Royal Engineer Historical Society, is Philip Brazier. Good evening, Philip. How are you doing?
Yeah, good. It's as you say, it's great to get to the end of the week, and hope we sort of keep the ball rolling, pass it on, and keep the standard up that the week's had so far.
Exactly. And you know, we when we ran through things this afternoon, there are times we're going to reference what's been talked about earlier. I think some of the things Gareth said. We're going to mention machine guns on tanks and the perpetuation of myths and things like that. So tell us a bit about how you got particularly interested in this aspect of the 79th Armoured Division and the Walcheren Infatuate Shell Estuary aspect.
It was when I was looking for a topic from a master's thesis, and what they tell you on the courses, you know, we don't want the complete history of the 33rd Latrine Battalion on serving in Italy. You've got to find something of interest to you. I'm an engineer, and I've always been when you do the battlefield studies, going over to Normandy, you hear about 79th Armoured Division, and it's a standard tour. When you go to Normandy, you go to Juno Beach, and there's Avery 1 Charlie, and it's pretty much 79th Armoured Division were brilliant, and they worked through everything. They overcame problems. They helped give a different result to what happened in Dieppe. And then when I'd read a few other books, for example, the one I remember reading first is The Green Beret by Hilary St. George Saunders from back in the 40s, 50s. And there's a section of Walcheren there. And it just was a completely different narrative to what you see when they write about Juno Beach. And I'll talk about that later. And I thought, oh, this is interesting. Why isn't it number of lanes cleared, number of bridges laid, number of obstacles overcome? Blah, blah. I thought, oh, okay, let's keep digging. And the more you dig, the more you find. And especially as this campaign, and I know we spoke about this afternoon, it's after Normandy, it's after Market Garden, it's before the Ardennes and the Rhine crossing. So it sort of fits in a gap to be exploited.
Yeah, falls between the cracks, doesn't it? Yeah.
The more I read, the more I found, and then especially certainly when you're looking at the Canadian side of things too, you start thinking, right, you know, let's keep digging, and hence I come up with something that is, yes, it's 79th Armoured Division that fits in with the week, but you have to also acknowledge the work of the dare I say ordinary, but your standard field company, and because they've all got to work together, and the other arms and services. So yeah, it's not all 79th Armoured was there and it all went wonderfully, and without them it wouldn't have gone at all. So problems to be overcome, things to read about, things to learn.
And I think the key thing that we'll come back to during tonight's show is the brief planning time that this operation had compared to the Overlord, where everything's got, you know, a good year really to work on things, and you've got the good intelligence, you've got your aerial photos, you've got your maps, you've got samples of the sand, all those things there, and one specific set of problems to overcome. The 79th Division, it has to be said, Gareth mentioned it, did remarkably well, but by October, November 1944, it's a bit stop-start. Some things we've tried haven't been working so well. Things we're moving our armies around, trying to kind of find the way through the gaps, and things are getting planned much more hastily, and we don't have that same level of information. And that's going to come into the show tonight. So we've got to start somewhere. So give us a bit of a background about what we're going to be talking about. There's the show header, but history. So. Yeah, I'll over to you.
What I'm going to go back to again. There's spoken by David O'Keefe in some of his previous talks. Dieppe. A lot of the historiography and the links go back to Dieppe. What went wrong at Dieppe? What was needed? And they realised post Dieppe. I can't bring it down to an enigma machine, but you can certainly draw out from what the engineer side of things said. This went wrong in Dieppe. Therefore, if we're going to do it again, we've got to do it differently. You've then got the different operations, which we'll show on some of the maps, which are, you know, Switchback, Vitality, and Infatuate 1 and 2, and Operation Mallard. But when you look at the engineer side of things, you've also got to look at reconstruction. There was an engineer aspect to that too, and there will be pictures of armour all the way through the show, I promise.
All different sizes. It's so exciting. Big ones, small ones, ones that worked well, ones that didn't work quite so well. All everything covered.
Yeah. So it's so here we go. As you said in one of your previous talks, you've got to have a good map. And as I said, many people don't know a huge amount about the campaign. So the red dot is where it is in Europe, and I know the locals that who I've met before, who I believe are watching this tonight, that was saying, how dare you not know where we are? But for those that haven't come across it before, here it is. So this is the Scheldt Estuary leading into Antwerp, and that's roughly 40 to 60 miles from the North Sea. And the island of Walcheren is called the key to Antwerp. If you hold Walcheren, then you control what comes in and out of Antwerp. Similarly with Breskens to the south of the river there, that had a fort in it going back to one of the Vauban style forts. And just for reference, people may well have heard of Zeebrugge and Bruges, so that's in that area over to the west. And then Beverland, in the time Beverland was there was more separation between the island as it was then of Walcheren. As you can see now, it's been reclaimed, and so that's the area we're talking about. And the British Army had previous in the area during the Napoleonic Wars. They said, well, we need to capture the island of Walcheren, because again they want to control what's going into Antwerp. So they landed about 40,000 troops there, of which almost half died from malaria and other diseases, although the Royal Marines will tell you, because I'm pretty sure it's part of their history, they're told they weren't affected as badly because they had better skills and drills. But again, those common threads, Walcheren was important in the 1800s, and it was certainly important in World War II. And then, as I said, in late 44, British and Canadian 21st Army Group was going back there. So the short history of the Corps tells us that 79th Armoured Division, and here we have Avry 1 Charlie, which is a standard stopping point on your battlefield study in Normandy. It says they were worth their weight in gold. Chester Wilmot wrote in his book, The Struggle for Europe, that it says here they were the decisive factor was the bold employment of armour. And even Eisenhower said the same thing. It made the difference on all of the beaches apart from Omaha, and we couldn't have done it, or the assault forces couldn't have achieved their tasks without this help. But as I've said in my previous reading, this theme didn't come up when I read about Walcheren, so hence that's what. And
this is that we tackle this so often on World War II TV shows. Once a reputation has been earned, it's very hard to lose it, whether it's negative or positive. And the 79th Armoured Division Normandy on D-Day, as you said, it is such a staple part of the understanding of the Normandy campaign. All the tour guides will make a stop there or at the other Avries they are along the beaches there and talk about it. And because it's the one unit that links all the sectors, which is good. And yet there's this other story. There's this other story that we're going to explore tonight that just doesn't get covered. And not only is it a different type of operation, different vehicles employed as well. It's not the same vehicles. And just in my prep for this, when you search 79th Armoured Division Google, all that comes up is either Normandy or pre-Normandy training stuff. You just can't find stuff unless you kind of scratch below the surface for later on in the campaign.
Yes, and part of this comes into, there was you've probably seen the very good early BAOR, so 47, 48 battlefield studies the British Army of the Rhine was doing. And the Royal Engineers one is your go-to volume. I think there's 2 volumes. There's one up to the Seine and then one after the Seine. And it's not in there. And you think, okay, why? Why is it? Because everything else is rightly celebrated. You go to Hillman Bunker, the directions are there. Don't go down that track. It's still mined. But nothing on this campaign. So that got the old spider senses going a bit, and wanted to find out what is there here. So and
another point as well, I just want to throw in, I'll let you carry on, is that the 79th Division prior to Normandy hadn't had any real combat experience. It's a training formation. Now they have learned. They should be learning lessons. They should be going back and saying, what can we take forward? What works? What doesn't work? I know they've had Jubilee, which we're going to reference in a second, but they've had time to get things better, refine what works, and perhaps ditch what doesn't work. But this is one of the interesting things that we talked about this afternoon that I think our viewers will really appreciate. This is one of the big lessons from Jubilee, and those who have watched the David O'Keefe show, this idea of tanks and maneuverability and sand and stone and getting them off the beach. So what are we looking at here?
So what we've got here is, so this is 7 Field Company, Royal Canadian Engineers. This is them training down Sussex, Dorset way, I think around New Haven. And so their task for Op Jubilee was to get the tanks over the Chert Beach. And again, a geologist will tell you it's not shingle. Please don't call it shingle. Please don't call it paper. It's chert, which is what you get in chalk. And the problem, again, when they had here is they were practicing in areas with shingle, when which is what you find in that area, as opposed to chert, which is found in chalk. And so the geologists would tell you they should have been practicing near to Dover, but I think that may have been a bit difficult in 1942 because the terrain around Dover, or the rocks there, are akin to what you get in Dieppe. But the Canadian engineers here had no training manual. They were sent up to Ripon to do training, and they weren't given instructors. So again, they're making it up as they go along. And so this matting they're laying out, you don't see it so much these days. It's called chest paling. So it's the chestnut sticks that are then wired together. And they had, and again looking at my notes here, so you get a 4-man team, got to run out of the landing craft there in front of the tanks and lay down 25-foot lengths of this fencing, each of them weighing 250 pounds. So that's 120 something kilos. So again, you imagine running across a beach like that, carrying a huge great bundle of fencing, and that's just in training. You know, I can almost hear the grief, the cries coming from the section as they're doing this, let alone being fired at. So yeah, it's a lengthy task, but that's the one they were given to do. The idea was, they believe that the tanks were meant to tow the armoured cars wherever possible. But as you can imagine, you start putting a vehicle across that, it's going to move. The armoured cars will probably slip off it. Yeah, but that's what they had to try with, and that's what they tried to make work. And we'll see another of their techniques later on. So here you have Major Sukharov, who later became one of the movers and shakers in the Israeli tank corps, I believe, from the Six-Day War. So what they decided to do, rather than relying on sappers, is put it on the front of the tank, and it can then get fired electronically from inside the tank, and it can roll out, I think it's a 25 foot length of it, to enable it to get over, check my numbers here, 28 to 36 inch sections of seawall. So this is the lower sections of seawall that this will enable itself to get over and then get onto the promenade, which again, as David O'Keefe said, it's they can get onto the promenade, but then they couldn't get off because of the losses to the engineers. Ended up with only, I think, 3 of the 6 lead tanks had this. They were meant to have more, but others got damaged. It's quite a flimsy arrangement. And but yeah, that's what they tried. And again, in the after action pictures, you can see this arrangement on some of the knocked out Churchills. And the other one is to over higher sections of seawall is to build a crib. And my suggestion is, next time you're going down to the garden centre and you see some of those railway sleepers for use in your garden, try lifting that and carrying that, and then take yourself down to the section where they're selling shingle, and try and run over it. But the plan there was a troop of 30 sappers could carry. There's 5 tons of timber there, 5 tons of timber over 30 yards of beach, and build that crib to enable a tank to get over a 7-foot wall in 5 minutes. And it worked in training. And here you come down to the question, is our training matching what we're meant to be doing? Because you can achieve things in training. And I know we spoke this afternoon about bridging competitions. When you have a bridging competition, everything's laid out, it's on a concrete pad, it's a standard, there's everything's standardized, so everything's fair. But when the reality comes in, this didn't work. It worked in training, but it didn't work. And then none of them got built. And so you then again up the situation where, was it half the tanks didn't get off the beach, and those that did were stuck on the promenade. From a sapper point of view, you've got a 90% casualty rate amongst the Canadian engineers. 7 Field Company had 27 killed. Only 9 of them got back to New Haven, of which 4 of them were wounded. So that's, if you're wanting to do this on a bigger scale, you're going to need to protect your sappers, whereas previously sappers have been delivered and got on with their tasks unarmored. That's how it's been for sappers. You've got to find a new way of doing it. Hence the evolution of 79th Armoured Division. Which, if we move on to the next one, so this is at Puy, and this is the get this right, Royal Regiment of Canada, and the firing point, the bunker, is, you see the German sentry's head just above him. You can see the firing slit just up there. So you got just a beautiful enfilading field of fire. You don't need to have highly trained elite troops. You can have a second-rate white bread eating soldier in there behind an automatic weapon, and they're going to spray rounds down that beach. And it's the more you look at the picture, the more you see, and you just see how they've tried to rip at that barbed wire on the steps leading off the beach there, and you think, wow, that's, if ever any of those that made it off the beach had something to say in their post-action report, it was like, we definitely don't want this happening again. But as I think one historian said, it's a little bit like saying they learned a lot about lifeboats after the Titanic. They certainly learned a lot. They certainly learned a lot about getting off the beach after Dieppe. But yeah, post-action reports were saying one of them, a colonel, had to wait a long time for the wire cutters to be brought forward. So they suggested an increased allocation in wire cutters. And if the colonel's cutting the wire, things have definitely gone wrong. They were suggesting shorter lengths of Bangalore torpedoes, so it's easier to carry and get in. But what actually you need is a system of systems, as opposed to trying to give everything to the infantry. Let's try and make a better way of our team defeating this obstacle, this system of defences. Then we get a name that came up into one of my reading. It's a guy called Lieutenant Denovan, who was a Canadian engineer officer, and he managed to get access to a Churchill tank. And through having a girlfriend who worked in the supply system, they were able to lose a Churchill, and he was able to cover it by if it all went wrong, she was to tell the investigating officer that she was ordered to do it because he outranked her, and that was the way around it. And what they were able to do, and we'll talk about the pros and cons of the Churchill later on, but they were able to get this one, trial things out in it, and then present it as a fait accompli. We've got this Churchill, don't ask us how we got it, but this is what we can do. And you then end up developing the zoo of funnies, which I think Beaver suggested is an indication of flippancy on the side of British High Command, because they just, it's just a zoo. But maybe it's just an understatement. I don't know, because again, they all had different names. Maybe it's just the code word here. But instead of the chest paling, if you look top left, you've got an Avery and its bobbin system there. So that's at Brancaster Beach in Norfolk. They managed to take over the clubhouse of the golf course and the links there. I mean, it's just I think there might be a 79th Armoured Division plaque on the bar there, but that's where they trained in Norfolk because it was far away from prying eyes. And yeah, that's certainly better than asking a section of sappers to run out from a landing craft holding fencing. And then you've got the flail over on the top right. Rather than prodding away with a bayonet like you see pictures in the Western Desert, you get that pounding the ground, and that's going to clear you a lane quicker. And we'll talk about the rates of clearing if you're doing it by hand in a bit later on. And then the main picture, you've got the Avery there with the commander talking to the driver with the fascine on the top, and that can then be lobbed into an anti-tank ditch and driven over. So yeah, that's certainly better than again asking sappers to either try and put a bridge across a ditch, or and you've got the petard, which we'll show a picture of later on, the main gun there, rather than trying to hand place charges against concrete bunkers or roadblocks, which again the after action reports in the Canadian Archive just don't make for pleasant reading. It's, you put flesh and blood up against that, and it's not going to last very long at all.
And it's interesting, we were talking this afternoon that it might have been that the 79th Armoured Division, everything would have been put on Shermans. It was kind of accidental, as you just told us about the Delaware boy acquiring the single Churchill tank. But if I'd ever read that before, I'd forgotten it. But to me, although it's got weaknesses, the Churchill is a wonderfully solid, well-protected platform to fit stuff on. The Sherman, to me, doesn't, apart from the flail, doesn't seem to me suited for this kind of stuff at all.
No, absolutely not. This comes down to it's not so much doctrine, but it's the production side of things, the Sherman tanks were coming in from America, and Sherman tanks wanted because they were a gun tank. So we use them, whereas there's some control over what you do with your Churchills. Therefore, they can, I think they were made, a lot of them are made up in Luton at the Bedford factory. So you can divert some of them across. It's a lower profile. It's better at going up inclines than the Sherman, and it's got side hatches. So your Sapper team can get out, on either side away from the fire. That could be coming towards it. So yeah, it definitely makes it a much better piece of kit or platform. And then they took it, having taken out the breech mechanism, the other aspect of that armament inside the turret, you get something I think like 30 square foot of extra stowage space for all your engineer kit. So yeah, it's certainly a much better kit. And in some cases, certainly on Walcheren, this led the way for Shermans to go afterwards, because this could get through and maybe push some of the sand aside with its wider tracks, lower profile, and the Shermans would then follow on behind. But yeah, as you say, with a high profile Sherman, you wouldn't. Yeah,
it seems crazy you'd ever think about using Shermans. But so maps again, and just for those watching, this is quite a complicated operation because it's not just one coast. It's several different islands connected by different waterways. So there's going to be quite to get your head around north and south and east and west, folks. It's going to be a bit tricky unless you're familiar with the operation. But Philip will do his best to try and explain the various stages of this, which is why it's a multiple operational. It's not one operation; it's several that stage after stage gradually work together to clear this area. So. We're talking about all of it, I guess. There's the map of the various places.
Yeah, so you started off with Antwerp in the sort of southeast corners. We're looking at it there. So that's captured 4th of September, pretty much intact, and that is a huge port. It's again, if you want to liken it to for the British audience, that's something like capturing the port of London intact. And certainly up until this point, everything's coming off the beaches in Normandy. You've had one of the Mulberry, the American one, has been smashed. The one at Arromanches is still working, but then you've got to put it on the Red Ball Express and the other logistics side of things and start trundling everything up to the front. So therefore, if you can capture Antwerp, you've got the ability to bring in to get there the firstest with the mostest, as the expression goes. But then resources get diverted to Market Garden, which enabled the bulk of German 15th Army to escape from Breskens, which you can see there in the sort of the left-hand red box. You can see an arrow going across where Infatuate went in later on, but the 15th German Army escaped out of Belgium into the Breskens pocket, which is that area pretty much carved out by the canal. The canals around the southern edge of it down there. Yes, the Leopold Canal, where it meets the derivation of the Lys. So that is then a piece of real estate that's being held by the Germans, having allowed the bulk of their army to get away. But if you control Breskens and you control Walcheren, then nothing's getting up the Scheldt. And as I said, Walcheren is the key to the Scheldt. So it's very much like capturing the old port of London, but then for the British sort of audience, you've captured London, but you haven't cleared the Kent and Essex coastline leading up to it. And therefore it's no use. So Market Garden happened. We know what happened there. And you then get the decision to launch. Now, Montgomery, love him, hate him, call him what you want. Again, his ideas were always right in his memoirs. And although I think he did admit later on that maybe we didn't give as much attention to Antwerp and the Scheldt as we should have. But you've then got to clear this, and you've got to, so you start off going from north of Antwerp on Vitality to clear South Beaverland. So that's the longer oblong red box. And then at the same time, by Switchback is launched to get across the Leopold Canal. So you're trying to get that two-pronged attack. And then Infatuate 1 would be going in to assault Flushing, or Vlissingen as it's now called. Once you've taken Breskens, go across the River Scheldt and capture Flushing. And Infatuate 2 take on the guns at West Capella, the naval guns in concrete there. Again, those of you who've been to Normandy, you'll have seen Nazi concrete constructed by Organisation Todd. You know what you've got coming. And then as the last bit is to then launch across from South Beaverland via Operation Mallard to take the eastern side of Walcheren Island. So that's as I say, it's a long and complicated process, and as the pictures will show, the ground is not that what's the word, forgiving. That's probably the best.
And it changes, and we're bombing it, and it's the winter, and there's tides, and there's weather, and there's all these other issues that come into play, and that's when we again, a simple thing, 79th Division Normandy, it's June, more predictable conditions. This is the winter getting into, and it was everyone now knows the winter of 44-45 was the worst of the 20th century. The snow hasn't come yet, but heavy rainfall, mud in Italy. It's everything is changing. The situation is changing, and it's not an ideal situation. But we'll progress.
Yeah. So then what we've got coming up next is a commemorative certificate that was produced afterwards. So this gives you an overview of the combined operation. You see the combined operations emblem top left, and then you've got 52nd Lowland Division emblem top right. But there, it's a combined operation. You can then see the red arrows indicate Flushing and West Capella, and then Operation Mallard to go across the Slowdown Causeway. But as you can see, the middle of the island has got water in it, and we'll come on to that in the middle. But what this, in a couple of slides' time. But when you've got combined operations, it's only quote I've got is close and effective cooperation is what you need, and you need good liaison. Which comes down a lot to the personality involved. Are they easy people to get on with? Your training, you're feeding in from previous operations, and again, this is the thread that will run through how well all this came together when we've had so much time for Normandy compared to what you've got in a relatively short period of time here. But a term I love on this one is cultural dissonance has been put to the headquarters planning on this, and that's the inability of the different services to understand each other, because they've got different history, different trainings, different way of looking at things and their working environment. And then another term I love here is corporate autism, where ambition and egotism drive behavior indifferent to the collective interest. Don't you just love to be able to sit there in a meeting and saying, this is a definite example of corporate autism? Wouldn't you just
and as you said, the services have different aspirations and solutions to the winning of the war at this point, where again, referencing back to Normandy, everyone has known what the plan has been for a long time. They're all pulling in exactly the same direction towards that one goal. So the Navy, strategic bombing, they want to do different things. They're, the bomber Harris, this, that, and the other. The broad front, narrow front, Eisenhower, Montgomery. There's lots of people they all want to defeat Hitler, but there's the way to actually set about it by this point, having Market Garden gone wrong, everybody's got a different idea now. So when you're trying to combine arms and the arms haven't got the same aim, it's a tricky wicket to start with, really.
And it's so easy for us to sit back here in our comfy-ish chairs and say, "Oh, you should be doing that." But when it's your baby that you're trying to protect, or maybe even looking to the end of the war, think, I want to protect it for the future, and I want to be there at the end of it. It's going to be an interesting set of conversations to have. But without going too disrespecting the RAF too much, 84 group, the support they received from them was definitely very, very important, and Bomber Command as well. So coming up to the Royal Engineers and this cultural dissonance. So going back to North Africa and El Alamein, your clearing time here, as I've said at the top of the screen, you using your detectors. Yes, in the background there, I don't know if you can highlight it at all. You can see a wrecked Scorpion flail. So that was on the Matilda chassis. So that again acknowledges their role. But for Alamein, it's the unprotected engineers going forward on Operation Lightfoot. What a name. But you mark, avoid, move on wherever possible. But the planning time here, it said it would take 70 sappers 2 hours to clear a 16-yard wide gap through a 400-yard minefield. Now, again, if we can mechanize that and make it happen a bit quicker, then we are on to winner. So therefore, use flail on Avery, get the fascines into the anti-tank ditches, and again, the priorities they had there was for one, get off the beach, use your fascines and your petard wherever possible, and only as a last resort do you get out of the tank and place hand charges, because we are going armor before flesh whenever possible. And thing I've again dug out from this one. There's a sapper. You have your training pamphlets, the PAM. The sappers are told, well, here's your training pamphlet. Use it, but it's an incentive to thought and development as opposed to this is how you will do the operation. And I love that idea because okay, well, this is what they suggest we can do. Let's push the envelope, literally. And all ranks from the engineer side of things, both British and Canadian, were encouraged to put ideas forward to help solve the problem. So again, we've got, and it's a term that's been talked about with the 21st Army Group, is initiative within the initiative. You try and gain the initiative, but then you're using your initiative to keep it. So you go with whatever's in front of you. But now, the petard and the 40-pound dust,
which is my favourite of the various vehicles employed by 79th Armoured Division. I love stopping and pointing them out in Normandy, and it's kind of very it's primitive and technologically advanced at the same time, isn't it? It's kind of a paradox. It's a very basic task it does, but it does it very well.
It's just a big lump of high explosive just being lobbed towards. Although you'll have been to Douve radar station, and the problem they had there was they couldn't get close enough for the petard to be effective, so they were standing off and just lobbing stuff in, and when they needed to get closer. But again, this is where you come into doctrine, because the armored corps, and I know Gareth spoke about this, is that the armored corps wanted their corporate autism, their dissonance, call it what you want, but for them, tanks don't support infantry. Tanks are doing tanky stuff. And whereas you get the development into having tanks and infantry working together, but we had the Armoured Corps advisor, General Norrie, was trying to tell 79th Armoured Division, sent a directive saying, right, your guys need to practice their gunnery skills to be ready for tank on tank. I like that. Piat on steroids. Yeah, that's very good. In case of tank or tank. But Hobart says, I do not want my tank crews to become a jack of all trades and then be pinched if an armoured unit takes casualties. And they said, what have we got? 79th Armoured Division, we'll use them. But no, he was very keen to keep them separate from the standard Armoured Corps. But there was still a need for your field companies, because where this beast won't go, you've got to send in your sappers, and this will come out for the rest of the talk. Although the bit I like here is you could use sappers to clear a minefield, and the quote is and even infantry if push comes to shove, but they experience from Normandy, and again I'm reading this to quote to get it right, indicated that soldiers were very reluctant to clear mines by hand, especially if a flail had been seen operating in the local area. And it's very hard not to see a flail operating in the local area if you got the dust and the noise going up. You can imagine Ginger, Smudger, and Nobby sat down beside the road, and they, right, come on, chaps, let's go and clear that minefield.
I knew Brian Guy was. I forget which unit Brian Guy was, but he was in Normandy. He was one of the engineers up quite close to Pegasus Bridge on June the 6th. Mm-hmm. And he always said, when we were busy either preparing to clear a field of mines or actually clearing a field, the minute we heard a Sherman, it was, is it a flail? Is it a flail? If it is, someone ran over there and said, oi, mate, can you come over here and do this?
Make the sign, for God's sake, make the sign, get it over here.
Absolutely, yeah.
Nature, you can't blame them. You would, surely, if you and I were in that same position, you'd rather not be on your belt buckle, prodding with your bayonet going forward. You'd be get that beast in that field now.
Yeah, and it was one of those things, we never had quite enough of them at the right time. But yeah, it's a great bit of kit. But anyway, we're moving on to the LVT as well, which and by the way, folks, don't forget that although this is November 1944, when we get to Operation Veritable in the new year, not 545, we had the show back earlier this year with Edwin. We talked about the conditions. There's lots of it in this show of crossing floods and canals and rivers and water. And the point I wanted to make is we have got much better at crossing bodies of water since June the 6th in Normandy, because of Bailey bridges over small bridges and the crossing of the Seine River. The Allies have kind of mastered that. If we can get the kit there, we've kind of got river crossing sorted now. I would like to think.
So, and but also at the same time, we've now got that peak of British manpower, as was said, as the moment the ramps went down on D-Day, British and Canadian manpower was only ever going to go down. And if you've got this operation, you're definitely trying to protect that resource. And where it gets interesting, and I had an interesting time in the in the archives is when you see the meetings that were happening in early October. And again, this is all rushed. You've got the different headquarters in different countries. Nobody's all sat at Southwark House. They're all having to come together and have these meetings. And you get Brigadier Duncan of 30 Brigade and having these conversations with the commanders of 48 and 47 Commando as to, well, what can your armour do? Because we've seen what it can do in Normandy. Can it help us now? And the commandos are definitely saying, we are not going forward without your armoured support, even though Brigadier Duncan and other commanders are saying, well, tanks aren't really going to work that well. And it gets down to the point, well, if you're not going to put DD tanks in the water, we want you to be landing your 79th Armoured Division platforms directly on the beach. Otherwise, this is not going to happen. And I love the understatement in one of the minutes. Contentious issues came to a head, and isn't that, you can just imagine the tension in the room. And they then said, well, the Marines said, well, we want you working with us. We want you liaising with us. We want a representative of your guides with us. And that's, again, a similar thing. If you know who's in that vehicle, it's not just some bod from another armour corps. You're going to do that bit more for them. You're building that team. And even down to the planning, down to the LVT, which we've got here. If you're operating on an island flooded with salt water, one of the bonuses for this is it's got a radial engine and doesn't need water to keep it cool. And I remember seeing in one of the minutes, radial engine underlined exclamation mark. This is a good bit, because this is gallons of water a day we're not having to provide for the vehicles. So going on to the LVT, they had I think 200 into the UK in late 43, and this one is at the Newdorp Museum, which is on the south of Walcheren, and great little museum there. And this is the first time I've seen an LVT. Have they got one at Bovingdon? I can't remember seeing one there.
No.
In the group, maybe
someone will know. Someone will answer that.
Someone will be putting up there. Well, the reason I've got this is so you can see detail of the steering. You've got the angled rhomboids, I suppose they are, at the back there, so those can be moved to steer it. But then could you highlight the tracks? You can see the tracks are quite interesting here, because they're if you think of your Mississippi paddle steamer going plowing along, these are what scoop and grab the water and help move it along the thank you. Yes, there is one at Bovington. But this was certainly the closest I've been able to get one, and that's why, hence, I was taking the picture. These scoop the water and get it through. Although the problem is, once you've used it to move it to the next task, you can't really send it on the roads. You've got to put it on the back of a tank transporter. Otherwise, those scoops are going to get worn out, and it won't be able to gain purchase in the water. So a great bit of kit, but you've then got to think about your transporter to move it from task to task to task. So that's another thing to add in. It isn't just like launch it and off we go. So a great bit of kit, and you'd have seen it in the films of the Pacific and what have you. So it's. But then we come on to Operation Switchback. Excuse me.
No problem.
So what we've got to try and get across here is to push the Germans out of the Breskens pocket, and once you've done that, you can then launch from there onto Walcheren. And we'll explain the different stages in the next couple of slides. So here's the Leopold Canal, and sorry, I've just mislaid one of my pages here. Never mind, we'll move on. So the Leopold Canal is as you can see, quite a big obstacle. And what they've done, where it meets the derivation of the lease, they've done a practice crossing, and then you have hot shot, which is firing flame from Bren gun carriers across to the opposite bank. And again, it's been proven that oftentimes all you had to do was squirt a few flames either side of a position, and that would encourage, to use the euphemism, the defenders to come out. Although I'm sure you're aware, woe betide a crew of a crocodile if they got caught by the Germans. So not the best for them. So yeah, this is the first main obstacle to get across. If we go on to the next slide, but they tried earlier up nearer to Bruges in the September, the Algonquin Regiment tried to get across to help expand a bridgehead. I think there was an existing bridge there already, but they wanted to expand the bridgehead. But what we see here is the German doctrine of counterattack, and with it difficult to get resupply across the canal. Once you've got a battalion or maybe two across, they're then going to come under immediate counterattack and infiltration. So this proved that anybody going to try this on a larger scale is going to get hammered, and you'll know this from Normandy. Any attack is going to be immediately counterattacked, and the only dry bits of land, because the Germans, as part of their defensive policy, had started to flood a lot of the land. The only dry bits are the dike banks, and as you can see, cunningly positioned MG42, beautiful field of fire you can see there, and then probably the next dike back, that's where your mortars will be, and it's going to be a very tricky country to cross, and we'll come on more on that in a second.
And that had been the nature of fighting, even up, in after Arnhem in Nijmegen, the island up there, the dikes and waterways. That was the thing that was happening in the autumn of 1944. That was what everyone was facing. Brits, Americans. It was the standard for half of the course. But this is an amazing photo. So when we went through this site, this is a great photo.
Yeah, so I found this, and this has been on the front of a book about the campaign, and I only was able to. And again, when you do your searches online, there are certain pictures that come up again and again and again. And luckily, I found this one referenced in a book with the Canadian Archive reference number in it, and was able to dig a bit more and find it. Now, I'd love from the collective out there, is there anybody who knows where this picture was taken? From translating the book I found it in. This is near Breskens, and I believe the photographer's up on the bank of the fort at Breskens, looking back across. But if you take the Bren gun carriers out of the picture and look at the background, that is so similar to what you might imagine Passchendaele to be. And this is the whole thing that sort of hangs over the Canadian commanders of this. Is a number of them have been in Passchendaele, and that part of those years of the war, First World War. Is near Breskens, and it's the fact that they're fighting over very similar ground conditions, and yet they were desperate for Canada to demonstrate its capability. And I know more. Lots has been written about the manpower problems they have with keeping BODs supplied to the front. But imagine these are the people at the front in Bren gun carriers, and they're having a really tough time getting through. You imagine, and just out of shot on the left here is I think it's a Bedford truck, and so it's okay for a Bren gun carrier to get through. On the second one is pulling a 17-pounder or a 6-pounder anti-tank, and behind that is your supply vehicles. These two can get through. You imagine the convoy coming up behind, the problems they're going to have, and then the just to the left of the picture, again, I'm not sure if you can highlight it, where the guy with the tam o' shanter standing with his hands in his pockets. Yeah, just to the left of him, there's barbed wire in there. It's going up the bund. Now, you don't have to go far off the road. If the mud doesn't get you, the barbed wire will. And then there's a blooming crater around there as well. Plus, and that's even before you bring in the defenders having put mines down. So yes, it's not good country at all. And behind
leading
them,
to this kind of scenario.
And you'll know from going to the Hillman bunker that the fighting that the Suffolks were doing at the Hillman bunker on D-Day, behind them was a traffic jam going back to Sword Beach. Well, this is exactly the same here. You can't deploy left and right because the ground doesn't enable you to. And certainly in the early fighting north of around Bergen-op-Zoom, and you'll remember the Fort Garry Horse. They were in Normandy. They took quite heavy losses in the opening actions of their Vitality campaign, which then meant, sorry, we've got to leave it to the infantry because the tanks aren't. Well, the tank can't deploy, and then when they do, they're easy targets. And so yeah, there's a lot of people queuing up behind the point of the spear.
Yeah, absolutely, great photo.
And then sort of clearing into minefields, as I said, what's not flooded is a dike, or and on top of the dike you've got the pave roads, and what was found is, yes, we want to use flail, use AVRI wherever possible, but the problem you've got is you can't deploy them in numbers. They can only be deployed in, and the term they use in the archives is penny packets. But if one of them gets hit, it becomes a roadblock, which then, again, sorry smudger, but you need to start crawling forward on your belt buckle with the mine detector you've got there. And the other problem they had, again, in the conditions you've got here, is that if a flail does start working and the crew are battened down inside, the mud it throws up means that all their viewing periscopes get covered in mud, and so they couldn't use them. So again, even if they weren't getting shot at, the flail was not the ideal solution in this scenario. So it comes down to sappers again. And if
and there's a predictability about where you're going. I know you're going to come. We've already mentioned. We're going to mention it later. The bridging sites, the crossing points, the dikes, everything, because it's been this way for many years before. The Germans know exactly where everyone's going to appear. The road network, the bridges. So it's difficult to kind of do anything by surprise in these conditions as well.
Yeah, and you're finding yourself fixed, and the parallel I would draw is what was happening in Helmand province. About 10 years ago now, in that with all the mines that are being laid, you're being fixed. Your freedom of movement is being restricted, and so this the next slide will bring this out even more. But my gosh, you've got all that armor, all that capability, and it still comes down to a few mines in the right place, and you are restricting the freedom of movement. So the previous slide had the Mark IV mine detector, which I'm pretty sure 20-something years ago I remember having one of those pulled out of stores, and we were told this is what you're using. I'm sure the design didn't change much. There's been a lot more happened in the last 10-15 years on that. But going on, sorry, if you go back. So the one they preferred to use, and you see the detector operator there in the left-hand side of the picture. He's got the Polish mine detector, which is identifiable because of the counterbalance at the back. Now, this was robust. It could withstand water, and yet was also highly sensitive. It's brilliant. It does everything. It's almost soldier-proof, and yet it can detect low metal contact devices. Now, I'm very grateful to a good friend of mine who took a picture of this. Now, this was cleared by his dad, and as I'll mention him now, he's Lance Corporal Taylor of 299 Field Company, and this was lifted, I believe. So he was part of 49 Division, who were operating, again, I think north of Bergen-op-Zoom, but it brings it out here. So this is a shoe mine, the wooden box mine, and designed to, I think, euphemistically called a toe popper, but it takes your foot off, and then you've got to be evacuated. But what him and his mates did when they cleared them, they then carved in. The picture's not that great, but it's a Dutch couple in traditional dress, and I think it says Holland 1944. So and he kept that on his mantelpiece till he died, and then it was passed on to his son. So respect to the previous generation there, because that was something I'm sure he would have been sweating and twitching a bit when he was lifting that one, and then it ended up on his mantelpiece. Then you see the top of the picture, you've got Sergeant Hickman, who is, so that's an official picture taken of him in Normandy, and that's with a springing mine, the ones that bound up, or the bouncing Betties, I think the Americans call
Bouncing
them.
Betties, yeah.
And him clearing that. But the reason I put him in there, although this is a Normandy picture, is that he was unfortunately killed in a site that's now called the Hickman Bridge in the southwest of the Preston's Pocket. And what you've got is, if you've got a bridging site and you blow the bridge, you know that as a defender, you know the Allies are going to come in and they're going to try and put a bridge there. So you'll destroy the abutments. This is all good stuff going back to BAOR. And I remember being taught this, and I'm pretty sure there are other people here who remember it. This is the policy. You crater it. You create a bigger than 30-meter gap, and you make sure the approaches are going to be mined. And then where do you think the engineer stores are going to be ground dumped before they build the bridge? Okay, well then we're going to booby trap it. And the quote in the Canadian engineers' official history is that this area became known as an engineer nightmare. Wow, it's just that's pretty strong stuff if that appears in official history. Yeah. And what they if you know the bridges are going to be a problem, they're all going to be DF'd. And then the other thing you've got in here, the Pyrex mine, saves on metal, but you think the stuff we use today to put in a microwave to cook your beans in a microwave was holding explosive in 1944. But what they had here then, if once you've cleared it, once you got your bridges in, you then and respect goes out to the plant operators. These guys don't get as much of a mention as I think they should. The bulldozer starts to earn its keep here, because they can be used to lessen the gradient, to enable vehicles to get up and over on dikes, enable your armour to negotiate crest without exposing themselves too much. And again, we need to, if you're going to have armour, you need to have bulldozers. And what we'll see here is there's never enough bulldozer. The alternative to trying to put Bailey in, and Bailey is difficult because it's big, it's heavy, it's clunky, is folding boat equipment. Now, most people watching, I'm sure, will have seen the Robert Redford paddling his way across the Vaal River in A Bridge Too Far. And this is the same kit. It comes flat packed on the back of a Bedford. You unload it, and this was the most popular bit of Sapper kit. It was almost a case of retrenchment. Thank you, Jan. Almost a case of the answer is folding boat equipment. What is the question? Yeah, this was popular because it could be carried by the guys. They're not having to haul heavy lumps of metal. And as the pictures there show, it can take a brain gun carrier and it can take a quad towing a 25 pounder. So the sappers like to use this. It's quick. You can make a raft out of it. And the main picture, you can see where the sensor has been at work, because they've blotted out the background, so you can't identify too much of where the picture's taken. So that's why it's in the Scheldt. But the problem is you can construct it, but it can be destroyed by a good burst of MG42, because that will take out the sides. And I think you were saying earlier on, you used it in a program.
Battlefields. Those assault boats, they're very, very easy to rip, put your foot through, damage, put them together badly, and you've lost it. They're easy to float, but just as easy to sink again. Yeah,
and that's the problem. So once you've got across that canal or that river, how do you get your echelon up to support it? Because it's all well and good having some tough infantrymen on the other side, but if you're not reinforcing them, you've got a big problem. So that's one of the things they found, that FBE, although popular, wasn't strong enough. And the Allies have got the machinery, but it didn't greatly matter in this situation. What we've got here is, and I've said it there in the title there, the commitments of sappers in the AO were much more than under the terrain and route conditions that have been considered normal since Normandy. So you're suddenly, everything you've accepted, this is how we do it, this is how we do it, this is the solution, this is what, all of a sudden it just doesn't work. And they were having to think on their feet and find ways of doing it. And one of the other comments is there are not enough engineers. So A, there's not enough bulldozers. B, there's not enough sappers. So what they had to do, which is similar to what was happening in Iraq and Afghanistan, is you're trickle training down the counter IED, as it was in Iraq and Afghanistan, but your anti-mines training is being trickled down to the pioneers, who then trickle it down to the infantry, because you need as many people as you can clearing these routes to enable your echelon vehicles to get through. And this required further and continuous training. But they didn't have it. And again, it shows you it's all well and good having the teeth arms, but you need that combat engineering support. And CRE of Second Army made it clear that they hadn't given enough thought to this, and the field companies were just left to get on the best they could. So now we've got Conga. So
and by the way, people are absolutely loving what you're doing, Philip. This is really. I know you're working like the Billy O, and there's a lot to cover, but people are really enjoying this.
I'm just going to charge my glass, if that's all right.
That's fine. And for those who don't know this story that's coming up, folks, you'll really. This is a really fascinating little aspect of the story here that I have to confess I didn't know much about. So
the Canadians had moved into the area, and this is South Beaverland. So sorry, this is north of the river here. They got into the area. They were held up. at the Beaverland Ship Canal just because of the slow pace. Again, just reinforcing what I'm saying before. It's getting your support up to build that momentum to then to smash the enemy. But this campaign saw the last use of the Conga device. You've got a Bren gun carrier and towed behind an Avery, and what you've got there, you can see in the middle left-hand picture, you see the rolled up fire hose. That's what it is. It's rolled up fire hose. That would be launched into a minefield and then pumped full of nitroglycerine and detonated. And some of the old and bold will remember the giant Viper and Python that appeared in a lot of the training videos of how battle groups were going to get through minefields in the Cold War era. And that's how it worked, and it's spectacular when it works. So if we move on to the next slide. So unfortunately, as you've probably picked up on the hints there, nitroglycerine is not the most stable of chemicals to use. And on the 20th of October 44, in the harbour area of 284 Field Squadron from 6th Armoured Regiment, there was an explosion which killed, get this right, 41, of which 16 were never found, and wounding 43. The group here it really helped me out with this, a group called Eisendyke Bevride, and I think some of them may be watching tonight. They're really keen to help tell the story here and the effect it had on the community, because you imagine it dead flat around. You imagine the blast wave. Can you imagine the CGI this would be on a Steven Spielberg film in all that high explosive, all those Avery rounds going up, the other explosive for an armoured unit, and plus the fuel. And I was taken there. The guide was Anton, and he said, right, here's the field. You see that farm over there, the white building with the orange roof? Yep, that lost all the tiles off its roof, and that's a good couple of miles away. So the blast wave was phenomenal. And there's a wee memorial the other side of that pond now, which has got the bent up track of a Churchill. Now there was a court of inquiry. It's mentioned in the war diary of 79th Armoured Division, and the Hobart mentions it. And now I've tried to find the results of the court of inquiry. The Canadians held one, and you can get hold of that report. But the one conducted by 79th Armoured Division seems to have been miraculously just disappeared off into the ether. I tried to find it. I know other groups have tried to find it, and I think even Richard Holmes tried to find it about 20 years ago, but absolutely no joy, which is it's a great shame. The story I've got on this one is I was there again with the, I think Jan's put some comments up on here. I was there in October 19. It wouldn't have been October last year, but October 19, and there was a former Corporal Brooks, Richard Brooks from 284, and he was brought up by the Engineers Association as a guest of honour. And after the local dignitaries, politicians had said there, but he came up and he said, faltering voice, and people trying to strain to listen. He said, "I've got one thing to say. It's a 4-letter word," and you could almost hear the sharp intake of breath. And he said, "Fate." And it's glad it was glad it came out, because he said his tank had broken down about half an hour before, so he was late getting in, and just as they got their I believe as they got their vehicle moving, big explosion. And he said, yeah, but for my vehicle not working, normally I would imagine he wouldn't have been too pleased if his vehicle had broken down. He'd be kicking the back of the head of the driver, I'd imagine, but probably quite glad he didn't make it. And the names of his mates are on that memorial on that you see the bottom right there. And really, really touching. But again, after an explosion like that, you can see why Conga wasn't used again. So now we come on to Vitality 1 and 2, and here we get 52nd Lowland coming into it, and theirs is an interesting story in that they'd spent the bulk of them were from the Glasgow area, and they'd spent 4 years training as a mountain division, being up in Scotland as part of Fortitude North, making very obvious purchases of skis and ski suits and things like that. And they were then going to be flown in from an airfield just north of Chelmsford in Market Garden. They were going to be flown in and landed at Dealan when Market Garden was successful. But again, as you know, that didn't happen. So then, having trained for 4 years as mountain troops, they then sent into action for the first time at or below sea level. So they're sent in to be launched across the Scheldt. The to outflank the ship canal. And here we see the LVTs coming in. This is from, I believe, from Switchback, but it gives the impression launching LVTs to get across the Scheldt. But where they had to swim up the canal to get to it, the purchase of those paddle tracks, as we've shown before, wasn't good enough to get them out of the canal. So again, dozers and sappers had to get in to reduce the gradient to enable them to climb out of the canal. I think the lock gates were damaged to get out of the canal into the sea. And again, he got I think a half troop of sappers there, always maintaining it. Again, because once you get this momentum going, you always know, as the picture in the bottom right shows, you've got all those vehicles waiting to get up. And the chief engineer of First Army was saying, in the future, we've got to be more roads conscious. We're not just looking at the point of the spear. We've got to be looking at the roads and how we keep routes open. And this is where the comment comes up, is we've got to work on the assumption there will never be enough sappers to go around. We're going to have to get other people to work with us if the sappers are off doing what they're going to be desperately needed to do. And then, so Operation Infatuate. So here you've got a clear Walcheren, which, as I've said, is the key to the Scheldt, and West Capella is the town at the western end of the island. What you'll also do is take, as I said, in those days it was known as Flushing. Now it's called Vlissingen, and so you got Infatuate 1 both launched on the 1st of November, and then later in the morning Infatuate 2 coming in on the coast. So if you go onto the next one, so Infatuate 1, here's Uncle Beach. The next slide will show you a mill that's called Oranu Mill, and this is where the Marines landed. You can see an LVT there, so they were able to negotiate the mud, but then you can see the bods trying to walk back across towards their landing craft. Imagine they're cursing their luck there. But again, once on the beach, you're going to come under, if you can get through the wire, which you can see in the main picture, but then you're also going to be coming under DF fire. Yeah, this is where, if you have the next slide, please. So there's the mill, and just in the shadow of the mill now, there's a memorial going along the wall. You can see the names of soldiers that were killed almost day by day for the liberation of the island. And then there's a Royal Marines monument, charging Marine going up the bank there. So yeah, they're into Flushing, Vlissingen. Yeah, go on to the next slide, please. And then you've got a miniature Normandy coastline there on the left, with all all those defences that we know, but then pushing your way into the town. Now, armour, the streets are pretty tight. It's bad enough trying to take a minibus on a study tour through there, but once they're into the town, the engineers came into use here because they could mouse hole their way in. And then here you see troops. I think these are Highland Light Infantry or Highland Fusiliers from Glasgow fighting their way through. You even got a story of a mountain gun team who, again, they've spent 4 years practicing, and this is their first opportunity to get in, and they manhandled, to give extra fire support, they broke down the gun, manhandled it upstairs in one of the buildings, and then were bringing fire down on German positions as the house pretty much disintegrated around them, and then take the gun apart, a bit like the old naval gun race at the Royal Tournament. Take the gun apart, take it back down, and then move on. So yeah, that's how they fought their way through the town till the end. Pretty successful. I think. But this is where we're getting into where 79th Armoured Division landed. So the plan here is you've got to Bomber Command was tasked with making the breaches in the dike, which we showed in the certificate earlier on, and sink the island basically, so that then isolates the German concrete bunker positions, makes them easier to take. Although you've got your sort of how your law of armed conflict comes on here if you're flooding a deliberate flooding of an island. And the gap they created here was 6 knots at low tide and then a 300-foot gap at high tide. And this is what, get this right here, so this is just at West Capella. This is 1,200 tons of high explosive. That's what it did, and they did pretty well. And what it's very, and I'll talk about this sort of at the end of the tour, the whole remembrance thing. It's one of these things at the time. Wow, they bombed the sea dike, they flooded the land. This worked, but then you think, wow, they've just taken out the livelihood of all these people plus killed civilians. And the story behind the leaflet drops beforehand and what warning was given is the wording of this the leaflets that were dropped was a bit ambiguous, so it didn't tell people. Well, again, you're not going to tell everybody exactly what time it's going to happen, and it's that's a good area for debate as to whether they could have done it better. Yeah, moving on if we can. This is the painting of the assault going in, so you can imagine that you've got fire coming in from support from Typhoons, from the Tactical Air Force, and then the naval monitors with their 15-inch guns. That's Warspite, Roberts, and Erebus, which again, people may remember the name Erebus has appeared on the BBC drama The Terror about the ship stuck in the ice. Well, that's because the Erebus was used because it was a monitor. The original Erebus was a strengthened ship because they could use it for firing mortars, so that's why it was then used in the ice. But they're firing 15-inch guns, which is 380 millimeters. So they're lobbing it in. So that's definitely a good lot of fire support coming in. And then we'll now come into the 79th Armoured. So if we move on to the next slide. So this is north of the Gap. The story here, quite a sad one, in that locals in West Capella had taken shelter in the mill, and the mill got hit. And then when the tide rose, they were trapped inside. And I think it's between 30 and 40 people were, if they weren't crushed, they were then drowned in there. And there's a memorial to them in West Capella now. And again, if you go there, it's certainly a good thing to pay your respects to the civilian casualties. But if you can pan back out again, the memorial on the dike is now where that mill is. There's a Sherman tank there now, along with 2 round millstones, and the rubble facing, again, sorry if you can pan back in again, you might just, at the foot of the mill, you might be able to see the sort of the dark stones around there and the rubble. So the way the dike is lined is you've got sand and then clay, and then it's lined with, if you've been to the Giant's Causeway in Ireland, you know they've got the way the basalt rocks are shaped, they can all link together. So the rock, when it was constructed, came in from Germany, and this has all been blown off the dike, and this is a factor in what happens next. If you could just pan back out again. So we've got here Marines going to launch off there, and could you highlight one of the track vehicles there? So these are the get this right, these are the Weasel vehicles, and they were it's a smaller LVT, if you like, and it was to give mobility. So there it is, following an LVT about to go into the water. But the plan was here that they put the radios in this, in that they could get them ashore, because they're amphibious, get them ashore and then follow the bigger vehicles. But what the problem they then found is, and yes, they were much criticized, is that they didn't have the grunt. They couldn't cope. They couldn't cope with swinging the tide. It might have worked well enough in training under test conditions, but didn't work in the reality of combat, which then meant that, and because the radios were on board them, you've then lost your communications with your heavy support, be it air or from the Navy. So yeah, that's a contributing factor to what happened next. This is a picture that you do often see for West Capella. If there's limited space in the book and they're trying to cram in the Walcheren operation, they put this picture in. So there was, as I said, there were no DD tanks to cover the landings because one had been lost during a sea trial, I think, from the Staffordshire Yeomanry. And so you think, and then going back to the Americans at Omaha, think of the problems they had. The Weasels were good in the Ardennes, but unfortunately here not so good. You think back to the problems the DD tanks had at Omaha in the summer. You imagine trying to do this in the winter. And as I said, this is why the Marines said, we want your tanks launched directly onto the beach in the front wave. And again, this is not what happened. Remember back in D-Day, you've got your DD tanks going in first to engage the gun positions, and these follow on later. So they landed directly onto the beach, and here's a crab from the Lothian and Border Horse. Again, Normandy, they'd had time to do recce's, and the time leading up to, there's the tale of one of the sappers shouting Happy New Year to his officer as they swim back to the submarine. Well, they didn't have time here. The shore parties couldn't get close enough. When they did, they were illuminated by German positions and fired at. So they had to go in with what they had. And there's, I think the quote of what they're able to provide is something akin to I can't remember the exact quote, but it was a child's crayon drawing of what they thought might be there. But what they didn't find was the clay that was under the sand, and then having blown the rock wearing face off the dike, that's the face that takes the pounding from the North Sea in the winter. Well, that's when if they've made it through the water, made it through the clay, and again, tank number 1 may get through, but tank number 2 is going to struggle. They then come up against this basalt, lumps of basalt rock, which they bellied on. They couldn't negotiate them, and this particular yeah, very much sticky Dutch mud. This picture here is interesting because shortly after this picture was taken, the way the armored teams work is you've got 2 crabs and then 2 avries, 1 avry with a small box girder bridge, which you can see sticking up proud of the landing craft, and then another avry with a fascine. Shortly after this picture was taken, that bridge got hit by fire. That collapsed down onto the avry next to it, and the fascine caught fire, which meant all of a sudden you've lost half of your combat team, and that's the other vehicle in the combat team is a bulldozer. So the this craft then had to go back, and whereas you're meant to get the landing craft landing side by side, 2 north, 2 south of the gap, you've then got them coming in one behind the other, and then the north side of the gap got way too hot. And the vehicles were starting to bog in, so everybody's now being landed to the south of the gap. But this is where we get what was called in the official history the Great Sapper Tragedy. They were meant to be landing 4 teams, and in the end they only ended up with, I think it's about 6 vehicles, as opposed to the 16. So you've got 9 on the beach, give or take. Can I move on to the next one, please?
Yep.
So the bulldozers were used to extract vehicles, but these 2 were then lost. And what was then able to happen is the LVTs were able to swim ashore, but as the tide went out, they exposed more mud, and there was an increased difficulty in getting kit ashore. And I've said here the Weasel was underpowered. So by the end of the day, all you had was 2 Sherman command tanks, 2 flails, and 2 avries, and one bulldozer. Unfortunately, both of the flails then drowned when the tide came in. So all this kit that you'd practiced with, you're then left down with what? So you've got six tanks and a bulldozer, which is all you've got to play with it. And they, well, exactly, if they'd been able to recce it, they would have found the clay. So you would think they would have landed possibly. Well, I'm trying to think. Would they have gone more to the north if they could have got off the beach? But you're trying to get both sides of the gap, because you've got to attack north and south of the gap. So you're going to have to land somewhere. I would imagine they would have probably pushed a little bit further to the north of the gap and not landed directly where they did. Let's move on. What have we got here? So the landing area is effectively cut in 2. So south of the gap, you could bring in artillery firing from Breskens. So they had 155 millimeter heavy artillery could fire over it, but they generally wanted a safety margin of 1,000 yards, which is a bit too much in this situation. And when they were called upon, the report said it generally fell 200 yards short, which again goes back to why the Marines wanted fire support.
Yeah.
Even if it's sappers providing it, that's why they wanted it. 84 group were meant to have a cab rank of Typhoons. And again, going back to Normandy, you always see the film of the Typhoons peeling in, but they were found to be patchy due to weather and then radio problems. And it says here they were meant to have 420 sorties. Instead, they got attacks made by 23 Spitfires and 28 Typhoons. And the request for one attack at 1,300 arrived at 1,600. So it's not, you think this whole image of, you've got the forward observer there, he's just whistling up an airstrike, bringing it. This didn't happen here. And this is a similar difficulty with bringing in the fire from the monitors, Warspite, Erebus, and Roberts. They're 14 miles away. So captain on the bridge with his binoculars isn't as good as having a spotter plane above. And they did bring some success, but again, the radios being lost, the communications not working, and also enemy mortar fire. When they start to see the vehicles that they think are going to have the radios, or the ones being important, you're going to be mortaring them. But this is where we get the story of the support squadron eastern flank. What they did, they converted landing craft tank and put gun turrets on them, and the the group should be able to identify what gun that is. Let's see if that pings up on there.
We'll see if someone pings it. It took me a few seconds, but no one's got it yet. But yeah.
No. Okay, so what they've done is they've put a 17-pounder anti-tank gun in a turret and welded it onto a landing craft. And these things, so these again, the fire support for the Marines, anything to take fire away from the Marines, and so the naval guns are then directing their attention onto these converted landing craft. They lost six ships, and for 4-7 Commando out at sea waiting to come in the second wave. There's again stories of them seeing these knocked out landing craft coming past belly up, the tide taking them back out, and think, oh my gosh, that's what we've got coming towards us. But so you've got a 17-pound anti-tank gun taking on 105 or 155 guns in concrete. And again, as you said when we went through this earlier on, behind you you've got the is that the command bunker? It's identical.
Yeah,
to the
it looks to be absolutely identical to the one at Long-sur-Mer. If it's not identical, it's very, very, very similar.
Yep. So this is your standard organisation Todd concrete. You can go along and kick it. Yep. Organisation Todd at the best. But this gun here is from Widerstandsnester 15, which is to the north of the gap, and that is a captured British 3-inch anti-aircraft gun, and they had two of those there, and they lobbed in 300 rounds in towards West Capella. And so you're desperately wanting to get those taken out before, and it was then captured by the Marines. And Widerstandsnester 15 had, was it 3.7-inch guns and two of these, 2 3-inch guns. And south of the gap, Widerstandsnester 13 had 4 150mm guns, plus some 7.5-inch guns, and then 20mm flak. So they're able to pour out as much. They're going to give it as good as they can against the firepower coming in at them. The petard on the Avery was found to be not strong enough to take out concrete gun emplacements. Well, what could was the rockets from the Typhoons, and again a 15-inch naval gun certainly could, if you could bring it in, if you could call it inaccurately enough. And German prisoners of war in the after-action reports stated that they were prepared to stand behind their machine guns. Again, go back to your to what we were talking about at Dieppe. You've got a guy in a concrete bunker with an automatic weapon. He'll stand and fire, and much like at Omaha, they kept firing until they ran out of ammunition in most cases. But they were prepared to stand behind their machine guns, and certainly in the trenches in the wider position, as long as it was only Marines in front of them. As soon as any armour turned up, and going back to what was said in one of the earlier talks about having machine guns on an armour, even if it's slightly elevated, so you're 30 caliber on a tank, if you're slightly high, you're able to bring some fire down into those trenches. That's going to make people. You don't need to use your main armament. Just having it, and that was, even think about having a half track. You've got an MG42 on a half track on the German side of things, slightly elevated, better field of fire. That's what you want. And again, here armor made a difference. And what was also stated is that nothing went right from the engineer point of view from the word go, and they were having to improvise, having to adapt, overcome, to quote Clint Eastwood. But this had been part of the training. Their training had included situations where things wouldn't go right. So therefore, the sappers were able to help the Marines take their task because they knew it wouldn't. This is what they trained for in a relatively short period of time in the dunes around Ostend. And so I mentioned the 2 Averys, the 2 command tanks you had. So 1 Avery was then lost north of the gap at Widerstandsnester 18 up by Dumburg, and another one was lost at the Black Hut, which is again further north up towards Widerstandsnester 19. But what you see here is the beach maintenance area. So this has also got to be established because you've got to be bringing your supplies ashore. And it's okay here when the sun's shining, but following the attack, and again, the local bods with local experience will probably bring us up on, or be able to help us out here. I think there's like a 3 or 4 day North Sea storm. So those prisoners of war in the cage that's been constructed there didn't have a great time. Being sat there waiting to be evacuated. But again, that's another side of it. Got your teeth arms happening, the fighting happening, but you've then got to construct your beach maintenance area to keep the bombs, beans, and bullets coming through. So if we move on to the next slide, here's one of the bulldozers, and as another theme that comes through this is bulldozers. We don't talk about them enough. We need them because these things help your wheeled tracked vehicles survive. And here it is constructing the beach maintenance area and keeping the lines of communication. And they were soon, they'd had two, I believe, got off the beach, but they were soon down to one. And you can almost imagine the arguments that were going on. Can we have the bulldozer? Can we have the bulldozer? Can we need the bulldozer for this? Or which side of the gap the bulldozer is going to be when the tide comes in? And I don't know whether they tried to move it, but I would certainly be demanding another one. And it's what's not reported is, although the bulldozer was working, it's then down to sappers hand clearing mines to enable the LVTs and the Churchill, which would lead the way for the Sherman wherever possible, to keep these moving, because the mines ain't staying in the same place. They're shifting in the sand. And as more stuff moves through it, the lanes that's been cleared one day will then have the mines
and it's funny how, as things start going wrong, the solutions become the simple ones, bulldozers and sappers with hand. The technological stuff starts not working as well, so it comes back to the old way you've been doing things for years and years. And bulldoze is a big shovel, isn't it, Ray? That's all it is. There's nothing clever about it. It's just a mechanical shovel. So and I love the detail of the back of the photo there, the devastation there, and the bombing.
That's right in the back there, the taller building. That's the West Capella Lighthouse. Now it's in the lee of that. Yeah, that's where the memorial is to the civilians that were killed in the bombing and who died in the windmill. And you generally had one platoon of 5-9 divisional engineers. Now, again, going back to Normandy, 5-9 division, you'll know that. Sorry about that. And the 5-9 division was one of those that was disbanded post or during the Normandy campaign because they were short of numbers. So these divisional engineers were then allocated to this, all part of the manpower crisis. But they were when not in use clearing mines, they're working alongside the infantry and using what they found was these backpacks called a Yukon pack, which they could then just strap stuff to and then start carrying ammunition and what have you forward. So if we move on to the next one. So now we've landed at Vlissingen and West Capella. We now come into Operation Mallard across the Slowdown Causeway. So the forces have moved across South Beaverland, and they've now got to get across the causeway onto the island. And then you're attacking from both directions, pincer movement. It's good military practice. So we can move on to the next slide. So here you have the Slowdown Causeway. It's direction of attack for the Allies is in the direction of the arrow. These are aerial reconnaissance pictures. Unfortunately, the ground no longer looks like this, as the expression goes. God may have made the world, but the Dutch made the Netherlands. So they've recovered a large part of this from the sea, and from my experience, I think it's now got a refinery on it. Again, some of the local people with local knowledge will be able to tell us more about that. But having pushed across South Beaverland, you've then got to try and get across this causeway. It's still the route is still there. Carries the main road onto Walcheren along with the railway line, and in the middle of it, the Germans have tried to deny the route by detonating a bomb, a large, I forget how many kilos it was, but even though it's been refilled over the years and they've resurfaced it, if you stand at either end of the road, and certainly at the memorial, which is, as we look at it, the sort of top end of the top end up there, that's where the memorial to the operation is. You look back to the road, if you watch a larger vehicle or a coach, what have you, as it goes along, it definitely dips at one point where it goes down the road, because even though they've tried to fill the crater. So what you've got here, and again, the history of this is interesting in that many British writers will say that the Canadians were rubbish, and Canadian writers are then trying to set very hard to justify what happens, and it all gets a bit tribal. the plain fact of it is that the Canadians got here. They were trying to push the way across. They were told, the maps told them that this was paddleable. That's the word. What he said. I'll put my teeth in later.
I'm not sure I got it right either, but yeah, paddleable. Can't do it a second time.
Then when they got there, they found they couldn't, and what they were, so they're then forced to, and the expression is a perfectly engineered killing ground, because your frontage is narrow. You've got to try and get across it, and then having got across it, the enemy knows which way your reinforcements are going to come. So although the Canadian forces were able to get a foothold on the western side, they then couldn't hold it, and then had to pull back.
And just to add, folks, this is almost certainly going to be the last half an hour of the Forgotten About Battle film, the Dutch film that's coming out. If you remember, folks, I interviewed the producer of that back last year, and I think that the premiere has been delayed again because of COVID. It was going to be released in Dutch cinemas and then going to go on to Netflix eventually for the rest of us. But I think it's all been put back. But I think after all the various escapades of a glider landing and the Dutch resistance story, the finale, if you like, is going to be this causeway battle. That's what we believe anyway.
If you go on to the next slide, having so now 52nd Lowlands in the, as they've done the replacement in position, and this is where we get the importance of recce. A young officer and I think it's a lance corporal were able to find their way across through the marsh and get to the other side, and then say, right, this is how we can get through. And they were able to then work their tape it off and allow I think it's 155 troops from 155 brigade to get across, and then they were able to establish a beachhead on either side. And so this is on the Allied or home bank, and you've got the area that's been cleared. You can see how muddy it is. You've got some German prisoners coming back there in the middle of the pit. Yeah, just where your arrow is. Yeah, just now. Prisoners coming back, and then I think it's wounded being hauled back across. But that's it, because either side of the mine tape, you don't want to be stepping there. And then using the folding boat equipment again, you're paddling. I think it's 2 battalions put across, and then able to be reinforced in position. But this then did help keep the enemy off balance, and yep, this is what worked, along with the fact that you've got the landings have happened at Flushing and at West Capella, and now you've got a foothold on the other side of the eastern side of the island. So if you move on to the next slide. So this is a 75mm pack at Newland, which is southeast of Middleburg, mounted on a bandstand to cover the crossroads. The position, as I understand it, was taken by the infantry, and it didn't take out any tanks. But if other people know different, please, I'm more than happy to be re-educated. So they were able to push north up towards. So they're coming up north from Flushing, as well as across the causeway, and then you're still working either side of the gap around the dunes, because that's basically all the land there is the dunes either side of the sea. Yeah, have the next slide. And then surrender. So you're pushing north from Flushing in the LVTs. The story here is that the commander, Sanam Dasser, I think he was, refused to surrender to anybody lower than a half colonel. So one of the young officers borrowed some crowns, or borrowed a crown and a pip, and promoted himself to a colonel, and he was able to take the surrender. But what you were told here is we need to have a show of force. And so the nearest thing we've got to a tank is an LVT. It's tankish. It's got tracks. What they were told to do, the drivers told to do, over rev your engines. Those paddle tracks on the cobbled stones make a lot of noise. So they're definitely a bit of shock and awe. And as they got into the main market square in Middleburg, this is where the German surrender took place. So move on to the next slide.
And we just got a question there from, I know we're going to go into the aftermath soon, but the Great Dominion is asking, why weren't DD tanks employed at the slowdown to support the infantry assault?
I think it's getting through the mud. I would imagine if they've, because they're not
Yeah, that's what
Yeah,
someone
because-
said. Yes, it's the mud. That's
Yeah.
We've had the answer from Belgium itself. Yeah.
Yeah, it's not going to work. As I said, it's it's unfortunately it's down to it's down to the infantry. So yeah, post operation, you've got recovery. The LVT came into its own here along with the Duck, and there is a case of Clement Attlee, who had yet to become Prime Minister, but he was sent to the area post conflict, and he ended up helping to rescue a farmer whose cart had gone off a road that was covered in water, and it ended up in a ditch. So again, the high level British politicians knew the conditions that were existing here. So what you're using is the LVTs then to help the civilian population, and at Serriskirke on the 8th of November, which is just post conflict. You've got a team of three LVTs from 79 Assault Squadron supporting 4-8 Commando, going in to help the local civilians plus extract German POWs, and operating in a 3-vehicle convoy. Commander took the decision, okay, first vehicle will only have the crew in it. We'll take the Marines that should be in that one, put it in the second vehicle, and first vehicle went through. Second vehicle had to move out to get past an obstruction, and then went into a mine that had floated into position. Problem is, when you've got overloaded vehicles, because you haven't got many of them, you end up with 15 Marines killed and 4 of the sappers. And if you go to the back of the street and round the corner, that's where the village church is, and there's a really good little memorial there to the Marines and the commandos Marines and the sappers that were killed. So if you go down the end of that street, round the right hand corner, there's the church, and nice little memorial there. We move on to the next slide. So yeah, congratulations, you've been liberated. Please be grateful. The big problem you've got is you've got a major prospect of a typhoid outbreak, which is not going to go down too well. It was said in one of the books post-conflict that Walcheren died for the liberation of the Netherlands. You can see here just below the street sign on the side of the house, you can see where the water levels come, and so the local population are living in there. You've got mussels growing on the sides of houses because the tide's coming in. So there's photographs of locals scraping mussels off the side of their houses. It can't continue. It's an agricultural community. You've got to get it back into production, and you've ideally before the winter storms of 45, 46. That's all the field companies on the island were working in the towns to help reconstruct them, get them working again. But if we then move on to the next slide, you then get to rebuild the dikes around Walcheren, the traditional way of doing it. It's wonderful. You create a matting out of reeds, put that in the gap, sink that at low tide, bringing in sand from either end of the gap, line that with clay, line that with, again, traditionally it's the basalt rocks from Germany, but again, you can't get the rocks from Germany, and limestone can be got hold of, but it's I think only in Belgium, so you've got to transport that from Belgium to the Netherlands, but it doesn't work as well, so you need more of it. And the Sapper officer Beckett, the one who he invented the kite anchor, which is used at Arromanches, and was involved in the other side of other parts of working on the Mulberry at Arromanches, was drafted in here to help reconstruct. And his idea was you lift up the Phoenix caissons, which again we've seen at Arromanches. They're not being used at Arromanches anymore. Let's get them shipped up. So they refloated them, towed them round to the Scheldt, and sank them in the gap. And this is at West Capella, so you can see the beached Averies there. And when you go there now, you can see how the dike has got the sea dike has got a definite kink in it. They reconstructed it on the landward side, so there's almost a chunk taken out of the sea dike now, and they sank it again. A lot of objections in that this isn't the traditional way, and it was written up in quite a popular book at the time called Roll Back the Sea, that he was painted to be this upper class twit English officer when he wasn't. So there's a lot of animosity there, but this worked. And once you reconstructed the dike walls, you can then pump out the land, and they were getting some crops back operating. I think by the end of into 46, I think they got the first harvest, but that's what you need to do, and you think, well, it's only fair, geez, if Bomber Command and the Allies have bombed your land and turned it into this wasteland, then it's the least you can do is then help it get back into operation. So yeah, that worked, and that is engineers, or both ordinary, if you want to call it ordinary, extraordinary, plus 79th Armoured Division, plus a very brief look at the reconstruction. So this is one of the crabs that drowned at West Capella, and this, again, some people will say this is what you used to be able to do at the Tank Museum at Bovingdon, but not so much anymore, unless you're in charge of a well-known TV company.
Yeah, they can climb on whatever you want. Yeah, and
so yeah,
for those who've been to Normandy and seen the gaps in the Mulberry Harbour at Aramonte, never wondered why there are gaps. Well, some of it has been just lost to time over the years, and some of it was because it was towed up from France, past Belgium into the Netherlands, and dumped off the Scheldt Estuary. So that's where some of the Mulberry Harbour went. So interesting. And I know we're going to come to an end in a minute, but I just want to again thank you for highlighting what happened to the Dutch civilians as well, because I think it's all very well to study this from just the point of view of the operation, but it's the fact, as you say, we've liberated you, but we've left your country under, or this part of your country under 15 foot of water, and all your crops and livelihood have gone. Oh, and by the way, we've bombed most of your roads and buildings as well. It's always good to highlight that reconstruction and that follow up, really.
Mm-hmm. Yep, absolutely. So it's and if I may, one thing I have forgotten is I have found, if you're interested in further reading, this I found really useful, book by Robert Katzberg, translated. There are a lot of books available out there in Dutch, but this one's in English, and I found that really helpful, especially when you're looking at the operations that aren't crossing the Leopold Canal, that aren't attacking Brescan. So that this is those books are really, he's done a lot of work and found some great pictures in there. So if you are interested, look him up. So yeah, my plug is for the Royal Engineers Historical Society on Facebook, on Twitter, and the cartoon there pretty much says it all. If we don't share what's happened before, then the future generation will not know, and will think anything to do with Nazis is just a computer game. Especially as that generation, as we are aware, with Prince Philip being buried at the weekend, that generation is definitely fading away rapidly. So yeah, we're definitely after people. If you want help, advice, got a question, get onto Facebook. There are plenty of knowledgeable people there. As you know, with World War II TV, there is the collective power is
the collective mind is better than the single mind. Yeah. And one of the questions that maybe once one of the Dutch can answer is from Sheldrake. There is, when were the fields back in production there? I mean, was it did they miss 2 winters, 3 winters, or 2 summers, 3 summers? Anyone know that answer? Jan, Nico, anyone know the answer to when things kind of got back to relative normally? Because there was they're mentioning the flood in 1953, the same flood that hit the East Anglian coast where my family's from, the Great Flood of 53. So there was a natural disaster to come another few years later. But does anyone know when the fields were back and running?
Certainly on my reading, I think Walcheren did quite well because it'd been re-strengthened. I think also in one of the books it mentioned, I'm pretty sure there was a crop in 46 of alfalfa beans, I think is one of the so yeah, they were definitely able to get something, and they had been really worried with all the saline pollution that they wouldn't be able to grow anything for a decade. Yeah, as you say,
47. Yeah.
So yeah, that's really good going, all things considered. But it's it even went up to so Anthony Eden, who was Foreign Secretary, was writing letters saying, we need to rebuild this island. It's for all that we've done to it. And it's as I've said, when I was planning my master's thesis a few too many years ago now, I didn't know this stuff, and it's there, it's in the archive, and then when you find it, and especially when you then meet the people who live on the ground who more than happy to welcome you out. It's a great story. There's so much good, interesting tasks there, and certainly for me as a sapper, when you're looking at clearing the minefields and IEDs, because they were booby traps, and even down to they were rigging them up on barbed wire fencing. So you're trying to clear the barbed wire, and they've got devices rigged up so when you start to move the fencing pickets, it's going to initiate the the percussion cap on a buried anti-tank shell. Just such nasty, devious stuff, but that's how it works. And so I was when I came to the end of all my research, it was wow, I've definitely been educated, and then that's why I'm keen to share it. It's a campaign that you can see now why the Royal Engineers Battlefield Tour in 47, 48 didn't go there, because it was flooded. But then when people came to plan the next Battlefield Tour, well, RE 46, 47 didn't go there. Well, it can't be anything to see. Maybe that was their thought process. But now that we are able to go there and people have done the research, it's a great tour. It is a bit flat, but you've got to expect there is
good food, good people.
There is.
I also want to I want to thank you also for being not too political, because I think some of my reading, when I've read the Canadian books about this, at this point of the war, it can sometimes turn into a bit of Montgomery bashing, and it becomes more about that kind of high level problems between the Canadian and British Army. This is a Sapper's point of view presentation. I very much appreciate it's been about the gear, the problems of the men on the ground, not so much that look at it from that higher level of whose fault it is, which you do get a lot of. I always hark back to Normandy. Very few books about the fighting in the Falaise Gap. It's all about who's to blame. Some Bradley, Montgomery, whatever. And I like hearing about what was happening on the ground without necessarily wondering about who's at fault at a higher level. This is about men on the ground overcoming problems, and I think you've done that admirably.
And each terrain lends itself to that. You look at Normandy, you're talking about the Bocage, getting through that. In the Netherlands, there is very few bits of high ground that is your key terrain that you're going to take. You've got to work with the with the deck of cards you've got presented to you. That's what you've got to do. You can't pick and choose. Oh, we don't want to fight here because we haven't practiced. You've got to be prepared to do that. And as I said, I'm really keen to get back there and have another look around. It's the more you look, the more you find, the more you get interested.
Absolutely. Well, I have thoroughly enjoyed tonight, and thank people who are enjoying it, watching it, have enjoyed it as well. So that's fantastic. I'll have to get you to think of some other subject and come back and present something else again.
Would love
Brilliant. In terms of what we've got coming up on World War II TV, nothing this weekend. I've got a couple of days off. And then on Monday, we start our 12 days of shows with a variety of themes. Claire Obin is joining us that day to talk about displacement camps. Then we go through, you've seen the schedule. We've got SOE agents. We've got the 888, the 6888. I'll get it right in the end. We've got a Sobibor. We've got all sorts of things coming up over the next 12 days. And you've seen, if you've been on Twitter, I've now kind of posted my theme weeks right up the end of July. So we've got Resistance Week, Italy Week, Infantry Week. There's loads of things coming up. So please keep up following what we're doing on Twitter. The description below tells you how you can buy some of the books and things that we mentioned on our shows. As I said, Philip there mentioned the Historical Society, their Facebook page. Contact me, contact him. We can find out how to do that. But it remains me to say thanks, Phil, for joining us. I've really enjoyed that. And for everybody watching, thanks for watching. I will see you on Monday for another show. So over and out. And it's over. Let's go have a beer, I think. It's time for a beer. So thanks for watching, everybody. I will see you all again.
Cheers.